Hello once again, and welcome back to Dusting History. Today's photograph comes from a fellow Redditor who posted this online. You can sort of see there's substantial damage, lots of old tape, lots of wear and tear, lots of buckling too, bringing uneven light to the image. So the first thing I'm going to have to do with this image is crop it, and I'm going to use the perspective crop tool instead of the regular one, because you can actually take an irregular shaped image like this and square it up nicely. Like so. It's a fairly good resolution. It's not super high res, but it's good enough. As with all my videos, I take the color out and do a quick levels adjustment to just get it in the ballpark. And I'm going to launch straight away with the remove tool because there's just so much stuff that needs to be taken off this image. And as you can see, I don't always go for the biggest damage first. I go for a lot of the smaller stuff. And the reason I do that is because I think the remove tool samples other parts of the image to use to make its repair. And sometimes if there's lots of little dots and dirt like the stuff I'm cleaning up right here, it can actually resample some of that when it's making its repair elsewhere. So I like to make these little islands of clean skin or clean data so that when I do hit those larger patches that require a bigger chunk of information to be repaired, it's got a better chance of picking something that's useful. I'm also changing up the scale of the brush, trying to get quite fine in some areas and working more broadly in other areas. And if you look at that line running from the corner of his eye down to his left cheek, you can see that whilst the scratch is gone, there's still the shadow of the buckle of the photography. So when the damage happened, the photo got bent and the light has caught the photo unevenly on one side or the other. Like here on this part I'm doing there, the line is still there, the damage is gone, but the luminance is changing. This is why it's always better to scan one of these things rather than take a photo of it with your phone, because the scanner will get rid of a lot of this unevenness and give you a much better base to work on. But not to worry, I'll get to this later and try and knock out as much of that inconsistency as I can. So in areas like the hair and the background, you can see I'm using a slightly broader brush and I'm being a little bit more liberal with the paint strokes. It's going to be far more forgiving than some of the detail areas of the face. I know I have to get rid of the tape somehow. I'm not entirely sure just yet, but the first thing I'll do in order to prepare for that work is remove all the scratches and highlights from the tape I can and flatten out the area as much as possible so that I have a very clean area to work with. You can kind of see already just with those cracks and blemishes gone, the tape and the boy's jumper or sweater, whatever, is far simpler and more easy to assess. I have no real idea what's going on with the front of his outfit there, but that sort of big arc of shadow that comes across his right shoulder and down towards the zip in the center, that goes underneath his shirt collar. So I don't think it's a scratch or a blemish, but I think it's part of his outfit. So I'm going to make an educated guess as to where that goes later. Now moving on from the remove tool, I've put an adjustment layer here with a mask set to black, and the adjustment layer is just darkening down the image, and with a soft brush I can paint in areas that I want to just drop the luminance of a little bit. And because that levels adjustment layer is a live layer, I can go back into that histogram and change the contrast or the black point or the white point of it later on and just see what works best. Here I'm doing it again with another layer, but this time I'm actually using a marquee select tool to select that piece of tape, because you can see it's a fair bit brighter and you can see it's also a little less contrasty. So by putting a levels adjustment layer in there, it's not a perfect repair, but it gets the background closer. It's like taking the fog of the tape away, and then I can remove the edge of the tape with a remove tool once I have the levels more correctly adjusted. Now there's a big piece of background missing on the screen left side of his ear there, and I want to remove that with the patch tool. So what I'll do is collapse the whole image down and then use the patch tool, slide it around, find a piece of background of that map that I think makes a good little patch, and then paint it in a little bit with a paintbrush. Next I'm going to select the collar on the left hand side of the image and mirror it across to the right, turning its opacity down just so I can align them more appropriately. And then placing the anchor point there, I can rotate this collar around and then distort it until I have an approximate match for the kind of position and angle of the collar that's missing. And you'll see here I don't just stamp the whole collar down, I try to keep as much of the real one as I can and only paint into the damaged areas. Then with a small blur to sort of set it back into the depth of field that's appropriate to match the existing collar, and a little color grade or a levels adjustment grade, I kind of get something that sits in quite nicely. Next, using some pretty broad strokes, I'm going to try and get rid of the damage here, the tape, and that's just using the patch tool again just to clone areas of good clothing down onto those areas where there was losses, and then try to just flatten that out a bit. So just to make sure I'm doing the right thing here, I've just sketched out the profile of his shoulders as best I can tell, and I'm going to try and use that as a bit of a guide later on. So a couple of false starts with this one, but I ended up just using the clone brush and clone brushing the map down and his fabric up of his top. And later on you'll see what I do to sort of make the outfit look a little bit more photoreal. Another little bit of copy and paste from one side to the other. If you start to become blind to the work and you can't quite tell what you're doing anymore, a simple thing you can do that really helps is to flip the image not only left to right but also upside down. And what it does is it abstracts the photography, and you can actually look at things like luminance adjustments or areas of damage that need attention. Like you can see, I'm just making some large choices about where I want to darken down his skin tone, where the photography had buckled, or where the background's a little too bright, and I can get quite detailed there and not try to flatten it out, but try and just bring a level of evenness to the picture. You can see that's helped a lot. And here's a photograph I found of a child wearing a similar outfit, albeit a little bit more modern. So I'm just going to put it on a multiply layer and then multiply that down, and you can see it's added some nice creases to his arms on the left and the right. I don't need the logo, I don't need the zip in the middle, but I will use some of the fabric creases. So using the remove tool, I'll just remove the bits I don't want. Or switch to the clone brush. And then you can see I can mix that back a little bit, so I don't need it full strength, just a little bit of weave and a little bit of fold and fabric sort of feel in there. Now to address that tear through his lip, again copying and pasting the left side to the right, a tiny bit of grid warp to try and get the shapes closer together, and then again just trying to paint only the areas of loss. So next, to flatten out his skin tone, I'm going to use a high pass filter, which separates the high frequency to low frequency detail. And on the low frequency detail, I can get in there and start painting away some of the blemishes that are on his skin. I'm being quite gentle at the moment, but I think later on I come in and do it again and get a little bit more heavy-handed. Every time I do it and then I walk away for a while and come back, I sort of feel like I can still see where those creases were, where those buckles were on his skin, and so I come back through and do this several times. In the high frequency part here, you can see I've put a levels adjustment and really crushed it just so I can see what I'm doing, because it's quite a subtle looking layer generally. I'm taking out some of the broader grain, some of the more aggressive grain on his face, and just softening that off a little bit. And you can see it's just blurring that a tiny bit. Take some of the artifacting, some of the JPEG artifacting look away from the picture. Again with another levels adjustment layer, just painting some areas darker. I don't quite like how the map behind him has that really bright patch by his ear. And trying to restore the line of his cheek. Now, that was me in Topaz Photo AI, just getting a slight sharpen filter done for his face. And here I'm just painting it in gently. I'm not going the whole hog. I think on his eyeballs I did, but a lot of the other areas I've kept it quite subtle. And whilst it's actually smoothed out his skin a lot, it's actually generated a few problems elsewhere. Some of the artifacting I didn't quite like, so I didn't allow it to sharpen up the collar of his shirt or the background. And you can see there, just where his throat is, that the grain was being enhanced quite savagely. It didn't do a good job of knowing that that was his neck. So I'll have to fix this. So I'll just start by blurring it a little, and then I'll come in with the remove tool and just patch those tiny little areas. As I said before, I wasn't sure about how this outfit worked, so I've made a complete guess that there was just a seam running down the center there. Next, I'll go into palette.fm and make a color palette, and then start painting color layers on top of that. After fiddling around for a little while in palette.fm, I came up with this as a base level palette, knowing that there were some issues with the color of the front of his outfit there, so I can just put another layer on top, set that to color mode and start painting. This is not actually the color I ended up with. The nice thing about it is you can really just keep playing and changing your color palette and seeing what works best for the image. Now, collapsing all that down, I'm going to use Select Subject, which is a tool in Photoshop to select the subject and do a really broad, it's a very chunky looking mask, but it allows me to play with the background and try different colors. And I thought I'd try a gradient map, which is a way of mapping the black to white of the background through a color palette or through a color ramp, and then mix that gently down. So it doesn't just put blue or green on, it's actually putting blue in the blacks and green in the whites, and then ramping in between, so you get like a nice complexity to the color. And then of course, because that mask wasn't amazingly accurate, I'll just go through and correct it with a white paintbrush. And lastly, I'll give the eyes a little attention. I often like the little highlights in the eyes. If you look at a photograph of someone and they have those highlights, quite often there's quite a blue around them from the sky contribution. So I like to sort of take the blue out of the eye, the iris, maybe make them like a dusty green like this, and then put that sort of sky blue around the highlights, the pings in the eyes, and I think it really pops. So there you are, quite a damaged image and quite a challenge, but a lot of fun anyway. I hope you found that interesting. I hope you learned something. That'd be great. I did. I learned something every time, as I always say. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you next time.